Hey everybody, this is the Sliders Review, and I'm here to talk to you today about the 4 R's of Hollywood. Those are remakes, reboots, revival, and ripoff. Originally, this video, I was going to talk about the new reboot of Animaniacs and how I dislike strongly that show. It's just not as good as the original one from the 90s. But then I started thinking about other remakes and other reboots that I don't like, and I'm thinking, should I talk about those too? Then I stopped and I thought about, what is the difference exactly between a remake and a reboot? Is there really a difference? Or are they just mashed together because, modern days like to do that nowadays? And so I kept thinking all night as I was washing dishes, what exactly makes a reboot and a remake, and why are they so different? Then late at night when I was watching Ash vs. Evil Dead Season 2, I popped in my second disc on my Blu-ray, and apparently it doesn't work. The whole disc is exactly blank. And when I went online, it turns out other people had the same problem. So then I became furious. And I'm just like, screw it. I'll like make this reboot remake video instead of making my Tragic Life of Rick Grimes video and the Wilds review. I will get to those later on, like this week or maybe next month. But for right now, let's get into something that for the most part I dislike and kind of like for the most part, but for the most part I dislike, and that's reboots. Now, I am not a huge fan of reboots, remakes, or any of that stuff. And for the most part, I'm not even a huge fan of revivals. However, if they was to make a Sliders revival, I'm all in for that. But the thing is, Hollywood is not original no more. All they do is take these older properties that people love, and then they milk it for as much as they can for money. Yeah. But it's a shame that Hollywood has truly gotten lazy to where they cannot come up with anything original. And many people, they don't want to see their childhood stuff get remade, rebooted, and have it be mediocre or have it be crap. People want originality and they want it really, really, really bad. However, people say they want originality, but then when somebody comes out with something totally original, totally new, like say in the movie, they don't go and watch it. And then the movie gets like a bad rating and doesn't get that many ticket sales and it flops. So yeah, we say we want originality and we say we don't want reboots and remakes, but then when something does come out that's original, nobody pays attention to it. And that's simply because people just don't know what they want. Now, for the most part, I just don't like reboots or remakes. However, there are the exceptions. There are some that are really good. But, and it's not modern day era that's causing all these reboots and remakes. Oh no, this stuff has been going on since the 80s and stuff. And even a little further than that, because, most remakes are just adaptations of like novels and books and comic books. So this has really been going on for a very long time. But TV was so original back in things like the 60s and the 70s and maybe even like the 50s and stuff. These huge networks and like studios, they know that people are getting tired of reality TV because people have figured out that reality TV isn't real and that it's 100% scripted, and like these people personalities aren't exactly what you see on screen in real life. So they create shows like all these medical dramas or like all these like cop shows, firefighter shows, and then next thing you know, every network has something similar to that. And most people, they love those shows, but a lot of people really don't feel like watching that. And so then they think, what if I go back into like the old days? a better time in Hollywood where people used to love certain shows, certain like movies, and like what if we remake it for like a newer audience and then mainly like a younger audience? And we can probably like cash in like big time on this and like get more like subscribers and views and people watching our shows. And that's really how it all starts. It's all about that money. But the problem with these remakes and these reboots is that, okay, they want a younger audience to watch these shows. I get that. And I get they want to modernize it. I totally get that too. Like a lot of this stuff is like really old and outdated, especially with the technology. But here's the main problem is that they try way too hard to cater to a younger audience. And for the most part, younger people aren't that like goofy, silly, or gooberish. Like they like a little maturity in this stuff. But all these like networks and all these production companies, they think, okay, well, a better way to cater to these young people is to make something very, very young, try to talk the way they do, or try to make like this new character that's an old character or hero into like a teenager or a kid, and throw on the slapsticks and throw in the cutter, and it's like, no, it's like the first thing you tell young people what they want to watch, and then young people will either love it or hate it. Like for the most part in Hollywood, it's like Hollywood should tell the audience what they should like, and then the audience decide if they like it or not. And if they don't, then they change it. Or the Hollywood thing is like you tell us what we're supposed to like, and then halfway down the road we tell you, well, we don't like this direction, and then y'all change it. Actually, sometimes that can backfire because it's kind of like Hollywood tells us what we should like, and then we be like, we don't like this, and you need to change it, and then they change it for the better. And if they don't change it, then it gets like screwed up. So I don't know. I guess it's kind of like a toss-up, Like take Sonic. They came out with this butt ugly design, and people didn't like it, so they changed it. Or kind of like Sliders in the Chromax. Fans told the producers they don't want the Chromax after they appeared in the second season, so they disappeared for the entirety of the third season and only re-showed back up in the fourth and fifth. And it's kind of like the Chromax were cool, It was a great storyline, so like you can't always listen to fans. Now let's get to the point of this video. First, let's get into some definitions. And a ripoff is pretty much taking something that somebody else created, you like it, and then you create something very similar to it, and it has some differences here and there. Now let's start with ripoffs, because that's like the fewer ones I have on my list. And I've watched plenty of shows that have like ripped properties off of other things. I mean, it happens, I mean, even comic books do it. Look at Deadpool and Deathstroke. They're basically the same person, but it's a different personality. They look similar. They have similar names. But it was created by the same person who just went to a different company. So, but it's still like a rep off, So for the most part, when somebody sees something that's making a lot of money, they want to get in on some of that money. And so they start like ripping off ideas from that other property. I remember back in the early 2000s, I watched a show called Cleopatra 2525, which I briefly spoke about on this show. And I like that show. It's a fun show. It's created by Sam Raimi and Robert Tabbert, the guys from The Evil Dead, Xena and Hercules, so it has that feel to it. But what does it rip off exactly? Okay, so the show goes like this. It starts off with these two women, and they climb up from the underworld, and now they're in the 16th chapel. Well, all of a sudden they get attacked by a giant machine, and the thing is like the size of a house. And then as they're like fighting the giant machine, their friend that they're with, he turns out to be like some type of android. Pretty much. Then they later on find this girl. She's from like the 20th century or 21st century. I can't remember which one. And they fill her in on what's going on. They're in the year 2525. The machines have taken over Earth and taken over, well, they've taken over the surface world. And so these people that are left alive, they're forced to live underground. And pretty much they live their lives down there. And there's a rebellion that's trying to take out the machines. This is very, very, very similar to The Matrix. In The Matrix, the machines have taken over the Earth on the surface world. Humanity has to flee underground. There's a rebellion who try to stop the machines. These machines are about the size of a house. These agents that are pretty much like drones that like go inside the Matrix to like stop people and make sure everything's working accordingly. In Cleopatra 2525, they have these people that are androids, and they're called Betrayal Robots, and pretty much they look just like humans. But when they turn into their robot form, they look like the Terminator from the second Terminator movie. In the Matrix, they do like all these martial arts, and in Cleopatra 2525, they do all these martial arts. In the Matrix, they have tons of gun battles, and in Cleopatra 2525, they have laser battles. And in both the Matrix and in Cleopatra 2525, they're led by a mysterious woman. Not to mention the main bad guy of this show, he looks like the Joker but with red hair. Now, Cleopatra 2525 isn't necessarily a bad show. It's really fun and exciting, and I love it. And, you know, 'cause it has that Sam Raimi, Rob Tapia style to it, you know. And I grew up with that style in the 90s. So and the show does have a little bit of like, you know, a little 90s cheese left over, even though it was made in 2000. I love the Ninja Turtles like so much. The Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles are some of the coolest things ever. I remember in the 80s growing up just like watching it and just like falling in love with it and loving the movies and the spin-offs and stuff like that. However, they got ripped off too. And in fact, Ninja Turtles is a rip-off itself. It ripped off Daredevil. Splinter is Stick. Karai is Elektra. April is Karen. The Foot's the Hand, and Shredder's the Mandarin. So yeah, it pretty much ripped that off. But did you know there are like over 20 rip-offs of Ninja Turtles themselves? Some being Mighty Ducks, Street Sharks, Samurai Pizza Cats, Extreme Dinosaurs, Battletoads, Stone Protectors, and Biker Mice from Mars. Like pretty much anything that has to do with anthropomorphic animals that are like mutated or something like that and fighting evil is pretty much just a ripoff of Ninja Turtles, because Ninja Turtles is very, very, very popular in the 80s. I remember back in like the late 90s or mid 90s, something like that. Well, pretty much late. There was a show called Nowhere Man, and Nowhere Man was a ripoff of The Net. This was before The Net had his own like TV series. Now, The Net is a really great movie, and I suggest you check that out. It's on pretty much every free like streaming app there is, so it's not hard to find. Nowhere Man. Now that's a little bit more harder to find. I recently found it on YouTube and I watched every episode because I haven't seen it since the 90s. And it left off on a huge cliffhanger. It's not a bad show per se, but it's not like a great show either. It was on UPN and it's fairly good, but it takes its premise from the net where there's a man who's a photographer played by Bruce Greenwood, and I think that's his last name, Bruce Green something. Anyway, the dude who played Pike in the 2009 Star Trek movies. He was the voice of Batman in one of the animated movies, and a whole bunch of other stuff he's done. Pretty much is a man who's a photographer, and he takes a picture of something that he was not supposed to see. And these people, this organization, they find out that he took the picture. So they chase him all around like America as they're trying to get the photograph back in the negatives. And every time this man comes in contact with people or people he's known in the past, they completely forget like who he is and don't know him. His wife doesn't remember who he is. His mother suffers from Alzheimer's and then she later dies. Like people that he literally just grew up with, like doctors and pastors that he knew, they don't remember him because this organization is making these people forget. Now, it's not entirely clear if this organization making people forget because they're putting a gun to their head and making them forget, or they're like brainwashing them through some chemicals. Because this is the problem with this show and why the show only lasted one season. This show, it likes to try to be everything. It tries to be a little sci-fi, a little action, a little drama. It tries to be like the X-Files at some point. It tries to be like a spy thriller at one point. There's even like a Mad Max ripoff type thing. And New York gangs like ripoff, stuff like that. And so the show is very inconsistent. Like there are times an episode where there's like paranormal type stuff. There's an episode where a guy who's a complete loner, he doesn't like to go in the outside world, so he likes to go online, and then he found a way to hack into like the internet and like go inside it like virtual reality style. And it gets kind of confusing after a while, but it's a pretty entertaining show and it's interesting. And of course, in the net, there's a computer hacker who stumbles across a program that these certain people don't want her to see. So then next thing you know, through the ways of the computer, they start erasing her life. So all her identities getting erased. Nobody knows who she is. They create a new identity for her as like a real criminal. People that she knew can't verify who she is because she's a loner, stays in her house all the time. Her mom has like Alzheimer's. She does have a friend that remembers who she is and he helps her out, but they later kill him and stuff. And so, it's one of those type things. Van Helsing. Now that was a very popular show on Sci-Fi. It lasted for 4 seasons. It has its 5th and final season that's supposed to come out this year. It was supposed to come out last year, but the pandemic kind of slowed that down. So that was 2 years ago when that was announced. And it's a really good show. It's a post-apocalyptic show where vampires take over the world. Humans are scattered all throughout the world, either living in the forest, living in abandoned buildings, or they've been taken in for slavery or food by the vampires. And this show pretty much rips off The Walking Dead. The very first season felt very, very, very much like The Walking Dead. We have our hero, which is Van Helsing, but her real name is Vanessa. See, you get that? And she's this human who's been in a coma. She's our hero, similar to Rick. So she's been in a coma, she wakes up, and the one thing she wants to do is find her family. She's looking for her daughter, and then she meets these group of like people who've been surviving. And so they take her in, and they try to like pretty much like just stop the vampires and all this because they find out she has a special ability. Originally, she was kind of like this genetically altered type person, but then it finds out she's from the Van Helsing family line. or bloodline, I should say. And so then they modify her blood, and she becomes kind of like a weapon. One unique thing about this show is like, instead of just injecting a vampire with a cure, she has the ability to bite them with her regular teeth. And when she does, her saliva goes into them and it cures them. Or if a vampire was to bite her, then they'll revert back to their human form. However, the weird thing is only one person dies that does this, and it's her daughter. And just like in The Walking Dead, Rick loses Carl, and then she loses her daughter. Another interesting thing is that when a vampire bites her, or she bites them and they turn back human, they are now immortal and can no longer die. So that's really neat and interesting. The acting is like so-so. Some people can act, some people can't. Mostly when they have like a guest star on there, most of the time in the earlier seasons, they can't act. Also, what's similar to The Walking Dead is that the abandoned place that they was living in got taken over by another group of humans similar to that of The Walking Dead. However, the first season is really the only season that feels like The Walking Dead. After that, the second season started to feel like Blade, and then the third season started to feel more like Buffy. As for the fourth season, I'm not really too sure what the fourth season feels like, but the fourth season kind of killed the show because the actress got pregnant, so she got written off the show, similar. And it's funny because Rick got written off his show at the end of season 9, and both of them, him and Van, are going to be back on their show sometime later in the future. Well, actually, he getting his own movies, and she's coming back for the 5th season. But yeah, once she left, the show just didn't feel the same because they added these 2 other siblings that are related to her that are supposed to be like her kids that nobody ever knew about, that was hidden by the government. And it's kind of like, well, that came out of nowhere. And then it's kind of like, okay, now you want us to start liking these 2 characters after we just liked this character and we also like the other characters. Also, like with The Walking Dead, they kill people off like left and right for like added suspense. So don't get too attached to the main cast that much. But for the most part, the main cast does survive. It just takes a while for them to die or leave the show. But yeah, it's kind of like what happens when a person gets pregnant and then they write that person off the show or is written in the show. Normally a show doesn't last that long afterwards. I know Xena didn't. An interesting connection that this show has with The Walking Dead is like, okay, when The Walking Dead was in production, a couple of members from Once Upon a Time will migrate over to their show and either guest star or be a part of the main cast. This happened a lot with a couple of the characters. Likewise with Van Helsing, cast from the 100 migrate over to their show and be in for a couple of episodes. So that's a little interesting connection that they will always share, like, you know, the cast between like 2 different shows and 2 different shows only. Now, Jack of All Trades and Queen of Swords. I love these shows so much. But these shows rip off Zorro. Now, Zorro, for the most part, you know, when I was watching him as a kid, I just knew him as a vigilante, a man dressed in black, has a cape, a mask, a sword, and he fought injustice. Apparently, from what my friend in college told me, is that he wasn't just fighting injustice. It had to do around the time Mexico and America weren't getting along, and they were at war with each other. So he was trying to stop them and stuff like that. Jack of All Trades is made by Sam Raimi and Rob Tapper, and of course it stars Bruce Campbell, the legend. And as you can see, the costumes from Zorro and the Daring Dragoon are very similar, and the plots are somewhat similar. Pretty much, the President of the United States, he hires this spy named Jack to try to stop Napoleon. So he sends him to like this island called Palau Palau. It's fictional. And, you know, so the French are trying to take over the world. And while trying to do his spy stuff, he figures, you know, if he dresses up, well, he almost gets caught. So he figures if he dresses up like this local legend, then it will throw the scent off the guards and stuff. And then he adopts that persona and starts fighting crime in that little island. There's tons of slapstick humor. There's action. It is, one-liners from Bruce Campbell. It's great. Queen of Swords rips off Zorro a little bit more. So, there's a woman named Tessa, and she's an aristocrat. And she has pretty much spent all her life, traveling the world. And she comes home after hearing about a tragedy. Her father gets shot. Now, she's been trained in how to fight in sword and stuff like that. And she's very smart. And as she's trying to find out who murdered her father, Spain is trying to take over. At least I think it's Spain. So her cousin tells her, your destiny is to like dress up as this hero and fight crime and stuff like that and try to stop the soldiers. And so it's very, very, her costume is very similar to Zorro as well, just no hat and no cape. Now, the biggest ripoff of this is that her father is named after one of the Zorros from like movies and novels and books and stuff like that. So when the Zorro people found that out, they put a stop to this show big time. Another similarity these shows have to Zorro is that like they have an assistant, or like a partner, I should say. Zorro had like that mute dude from the older TV show. I forget his name. What is it? The Bruce Campbell dude, he had Amelia, and she's like this scientist type person. And then Tessa from Queen of Swords, she had Martha, her cousin, who was also like this kind of like fortune teller type person. And all these shows take place around the same like time era and have similar clothing, and it was just like a blatant ripoff. Other huge ripoffs are like this show called Mutant X. That's basically just a ripoff of X-Men, but I believe Mutant X also had comic books. When Marvel found this out, they put like a end to like this show. Basically, it's just a bunch of mutants. They have kind of like this underground bunker type hideout place. They have this jet that they fly in on missions, and they try to stop like injustice towards mutants from the humans. And what's ironic about this show is like I think the guy who voices Professor X in the X-Men animated series, he shows up in the pilot. They also have this villain that's very similar to Magneto. Now, one of the biggest ripoffs comes from something that I never even knew was a ripoff to begin with. I just assumed that it was an original property. I didn't find this out until 2017 when I started watching this show. And it's kind of like, I'm like, this seems very similar to this movie. They must have ripped this movie off. Turns out, the person who created this movie franchise, or books, I shall say, she ripped that off from another author, from another book. And that is Harry Potter. Oh yes, Harry Potter ripped off the worst witch. In pretty much every way, shape, and form there is. So, the author, whose name shall not be named, she pretty much grew up reading books, and so she got inspired to write Harry Potter. Now, Harry Potter deals with a little boy who lives in the human world who does not know he has magic. He doesn't know he's a warlock, or a wizard, I should say. The worst witch deals with a girl named Mildred Hubble, and she lives in the real world, and she doesn't know she's a witch. Now here are some similarities for you. Okay, after they find out that they're magically inclined, they both go to kind of like this boarding school for witches and wizards and warlocks. But in The Worst Witch, it's an all-girls academy for witches. The headmaster and headmistress of both these academies, they're very old, very sweet, very soft-spoken, and they just do everything out their way to help the protagonist. The Potions Master is a person who is tall, somewhat pale, has black hair, dresses all in black, and cannot stand our protagonist. Not only until towards the end they start to lighten up and like the protagonist, but for the most part, they cannot stand this person. Also, the Potion Master is very grumpy, very stern, and very mean. The protagonist has a best friend that's really smart and very sweet and tries to help our protagonist out in any way, shape, and possible. The protagonist's other best friend is not very smart, more of a rebel, and always getting in trouble. The protagonist has this extreme bully at school that comes from a very prestigious witch family. The headmaster type person has an evil sibling. Miss Cackle has a twin, and now recently, because of the new Harry Potter movies that just come out, those Fantastic Beasts movies, she, who shall not be named, she created a brother for Dumbledore, who's a bad guy. Also, out of all the witches at that school, only our protagonist is the only one who can defeat evil. There are other similarities between the two. I'll probably go more in depth in another video, but basically, you know who ripped off the worst witch in every way possible. And before you say well, okay, here's some more proof to it. The Worst Witch, the first book, came out in 1974. The first Harry Potter book didn't come out until 1997. The Worst Witch has had several TV shows, a movie, and a bunch of spin-offs. The movie came out in 1986. The first show came out in 1998. It had 2 spin-offs, and it even came out with another show called The New Worst Witch. I have no idea how long I've been talking. I hope it's not over an hour. All I know is my mouth is sort of talking. Now, the first series, it ended in the year 2001, and that's the same year that Harry Potter, the first movie, came out. So The Worst Witch did it first, and you know who copied it and made it into Harry Potter, and a bunch of other properties as well. And yes, the creator of The Worst Witch, Jill Murphy, she does not like you know who. Now, I personally like both The Worst Witch and Harry Potter. I started watching Harry Potter first, and I didn't even know until The Worst Witch until 2017, like I said, on Netflix. And it's kind of like, you know, even though I hate ripoffs for the most part, I do love Harry Potter. Like, Harry Potter was really good. I haven't watched Harry Potter in a couple of years, but, you know, Harry Potter is really good. It's just certain directors haven't done a pretty good job. Like, I don't like David Yates at all. Once he took on board, all the fun was taken out of Harry Potter, and it mostly just became like a teen romance thing. But, you know, which do I think is better? Probably Harry Potter, because Harry Potter is more in depth and more like story driven, whereas The Worst Witch is kind of more like lighthearted and has different stories going on. But I do think both are really good, and you really should check out The Worst Witch. Now, finding the original TV show, that's gonna be a little tricky right there, because it's really hard to find. I shall talk to you later. Bye.